It was a quiet evening in a small town, the kind of night when the air feels soft and peaceful, and the streets are filled with the hum of conversations. The town's old community theater stood at the corner, glowing with warm lights and gentle excitement. People were slowly walking in, dressed in their best clothes, ready to enjoy the annual concert. It was a night everyone looked forward to, a night where local talents came together to perform music, sing songs, and bring a bit of beauty to ordinary life. Inside the hall, the stage was set with a shiny grand piano placed right at the center. Its polished surface reflected the lights above, as if it too was waiting for something special to happen. The seats began to fill up. Laughter, whispers, and the soft rustling of programs filled the air. The event was meant to be lighthearted, a mix of young musicians, singers, and a few surprise acts. But among the performers listed for the evening, one name caught people's attention. It wasn't because she was famous, but because nobody really knew much about her. She was known around town, of course. She worked quietly at a small bookstore near the market. People saw her often, arranging books on the shelves, helping children find storybooks, or serving customers with a shy smile. She lived alone in a small apartment above the store. She didn't talk much, and most thought she preferred solitude. No one ever imagined she had any connection to music, let alone the piano. So when her name appeared on the program as a performer, people were curious but mostly surprised. Some even thought it was a mistake. A few whispered to each other, saying maybe she was just filling in for someone who canceled. Others joked softly, wondering if she would actually play or just sit there nervously. No one expected much. The audience was in a cheerful mood, ready to be entertained but not prepared for what the night was truly about to bring. Backstage, the atmosphere was different. Young performers were chatting, laughing, and checking their instruments. Some were nervous but excited, practicing their parts under their breath. And there she was, sitting quietly near the corner, her hands resting on her lap, a small paper folded neatly between them. It was her song list, though she didn't need it. She already knew every note by heart. Still, her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the crowd she feared. It was the piano. She hadn't touched one in years. As she waited for her turn, her eyes wandered to the stage curtain that swayed gently every time someone passed. Beyond that curtain was the piano, that instrument that once meant everything to her. Memories began to surface. Memories she thought she had buried long ago. The long afternoons she spent practicing, the joy she once felt when her fingers flowed over the keys, the applause that used to fill her heart. But along with those memories came pain, the kind that leaves invisible scars. Someone backstage called her name softly, letting her know she would perform soon. Her chest tightened. She smiled politely and nodded, though inside she wasn't sure if she could do it. It had been so long since she last played in front of anyone. In fact, it had been years since she played at all. The piano had once been her voice, her dream, her everything. But life has a strange way of changing people's paths, and hers had changed suddenly, painfully, and without warning. She took a slow breath and stood up. The sound of applause from the previous performer faded as the host stepped onto the stage to announce her name. The audience clapped politely, not with excitement but with simple curiosity. As she walked onto the stage, her steps were calm but her heart pounded loudly in her chest. The lights were bright, the audience seemed endless, and the piano stood there waiting, elegant, silent, almost intimidating. She reached the piano and paused. Her reflection looked back at her from the glossy surface. For a moment she hesitated, as if deciding whether to sit or turn back, but she took another breath, lifted her chin, and sat down. The bench creaked slightly under her weight. She adjusted the height, touched the keys lightly, and felt the familiar chill of the smooth ivory under her fingertips. It felt strange and familiar at the same time, like meeting an old friend after years of silence. From the audience, people watched her quietly. Some tilted their heads, curious about what she would play. Others whispered again, saying she looked nervous. A few smiled kindly, hoping it would go well. The host stepped off the stage, the lights dimmed a little, and then silence. A silence so deep you could hear a pin drop. She closed her eyes for a second. Her mind wasn't in that hall anymore. It was back in time to the days when music filled her world. She remembered the small music school she once attended, the piano room with big windows, the sound of rain outside as she practiced. She remembered the laughter, the dreams she once had of performing on big stages, of sharing music that could touch hearts. But she also remembered the night it all ended, the night that took someone she loved deeply, and with that loss, took her music too. Since that day, she couldn't play. Every note reminded her of what she had lost. Every melody reopened a wound that never fully healed. She had tried once or twice, but her hands froze each time, her heart tightening until she couldn't continue. Eventually, she stopped trying altogether. The piano at her old home was covered, untouched, like a secret she never wanted to uncover again. But tonight was different. She didn't come here to prove anything to anyone. She didn't come for applause or praise. She came because something deep inside her told her it was time to face the things she had run away from for so long, time to let go of the pain she had carried quietly all these years. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a brief moment they shook slightly, then stilled. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. A soft note echoed through the hall. It was delicate, uncertain, but real. Her eyes stayed closed as her fingers moved again, this time with more confidence. The melody began slowly, like a whisper, like a story just beginning to unfold. The sound filled the room, quiet but powerful, fragile yet full of emotion. The audience leaned forward. The whispers stopped. No one expected what they were hearing. It wasn't just music. It was something more, something that seemed to come from a place beyond words. Each note carried emotion, sadness, warmth, longing. Her hands moved with grace, every motion connected to her heart. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the sound wrapped around everyone present. As the melody grew, people could see a change in her face. The nervousness faded. She wasn't that quiet bookstore woman anymore. She was someone else, someone alive, free, and filled with something deep and powerful. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a voice that had been silent for too long, finally speaking again. Each note carried a memory, a piece of her soul she had kept hidden from the world. When she reached the middle of the piece, her hands moved faster. The emotion deepened. It wasn't perfect. A few notes wavered, but no one cared. What mattered was the honesty of it. It felt real. It felt human. The music had a heartbeat of its own, and it pulled everyone in. Among the crowd, some sat still, others leaned back with closed eyes, letting the music wash over them. Even the children who had been restless earlier sat quietly. The sound seemed to fill every corner of the hall, every heart. People didn't understand why they felt so moved, but they did. Something about her playing made them feel connected, to her, to themselves, to something bigger. When she finally reached the last few notes, her fingers slowed down. The melody softened again, fading like the last rays of sunset, and then silence returned. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if the entire room had forgotten to breathe. She lifted her hands slowly off the keys and kept her eyes closed. Her heart was beating fast, but there was a peace inside her she hadn't felt in years. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single pair of hands began to clap. And then another. And another. Within seconds, the hall was filled with applause, warm, genuine, overwhelming. She opened her eyes, and for the first time that night she smiled. Not because people were clapping, but because she had finally done what she thought she never could again. She stood up slowly, bowed politely, and walked off the stage. As she disappeared behind the curtain, tears filled her eyes, and not of sadness, but of release. She didn't know what the audience saw or felt, but she knew what had changed inside her. For the first time in years, she felt light, like she could finally breathe again, and though she didn't realize it yet, that performance was only the beginning of something much deeper, something that would transform not only her life, but the hearts of everyone who had witnessed that quiet miracle. The applause still echoed in her ears long after she stepped off the stage. Backstage, people looked at her with surprise and admiration. A few of the younger performers who had whispered earlier now stood in silence, unsure what to say. One of them smiled awkwardly and said, "That was beautiful." She nodded gently, thanking them in a soft voice, her eyes still moist. She found a quiet corner behind the curtain and sat down, taking slow breaths. The sound of the next performer on stage drifted faintly through the hall, but she barely heard it. Her fingers still tingled from playing, as if the piano's energy had stayed with her. She wiped the corner of her eyes and looked at her hands. For years, they had only touched books and paper. Tonight, they had found their old rhythm again. For a moment, she didn't know what to feel. Part of her was relieved that it was over. Another part felt strangely alive, like she had just woken up after a long, deep sleep. The memories she had feared for years were returning, but they no longer hurt the same way. They were softer now, less sharp, maybe because she had finally faced them. The host called for a short break before the next performance. People in the audience began to talk excitedly. Many said they hadn't heard something that emotional in a long time. Some said they didn't even know who she was but wanted to meet her. A few even asked for her to play again. She didn't hear any of it. She quietly slipped out from the backstage door and stepped into the cold night air. Outside, the street was almost empty. The lights from the theater glowed behind her as she walked down the quiet road. Each step echoed softly on the pavement. The night breeze touched her face and she looked up at the sky, a sky full of stars. For a long time she just stood there breathing deeply, feeling free. It had been so long since she felt that way. The piano had once been her life. She had learned to play as a child, when her parents discovered her love for sound. Every evening she would sit by the old upright piano at home, pressing random keys, laughing at the strange melodies that came out. Her parents would stand by the door smiling quietly, proud and amused. They saved money for years to get her lessons. Those lessons became her escape, her passion, her dream. By her teenage years, she was performing at school recitals, small events, and church gatherings. People noticed her gift. Her music wasn't flashy, and it was full of feeling. Every piece she played seemed to carry a story. Her teacher once told her, "You don't just play the notes, you make people feel them." That line stayed with her for life. But dreams can be fragile. She had planned to pursue music full-time, maybe even travel one day to study at a conservatory. And for a while it seemed possible, but life took an unexpected turn. A tragic accident took away the person she loved most, someone who had always encouraged her to keep playing. After that night, the piano turned into a painful reminder. The same hands that once found joy on the keys now trembled with grief. For years, she couldn't even look at a piano without her chest tightening. She moved away from her old home and started over in this quiet town. She found work at a bookstore, a place that was peaceful, predictable, safe. She liked being surrounded by stories, even if they weren't her own. Books didn't ask her to relive the past. They didn't make her feel. But deep inside, something always called her back. Every time she heard someone play, even from a distance, her heart stirred. Sometimes she'd pause by a street musician or watch a concert online, her eyes filling with tears she couldn't explain. The music reminded her of what she had lost, but also of who she once was. When the local concert announcement appeared on the community board a few months ago, she walked past it every day. For weeks, she avoided looking directly at it, pretending it didn't exist. But one morning, before opening the bookstore, she stopped in front of the poster again. It said, "A Night of Music and Memories." Something about those words touched her. That night, she wrote her name on the sign-up sheet. She didn't tell anyone. Not even the lady who ran the store or the neighbors who greeted her every morning. For weeks, she practiced late at night in secret at a friend's small music studio. At first, her hands were stiff. The notes came out wrong, the rhythm broken. She almost gave up. But she kept trying one evening after another, until the music began to return. It wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about finding her connection to the piano again, that wordless bond between her heart and the sound. By the time the concert night arrived, she was still nervous, but something in her knew she had to do it. She didn't expect applause. She just wanted to play once more, truly play without fear. And tonight she had done it. Now, standing alone under the night sky, she finally allowed herself to cry. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain, but from release. The tears carried away years of silence, guilt, and fear. The world felt different. Quieter, kinder. She didn't notice that a man had stepped out of the theater behind her, watching quietly. He was one of the organizers, someone who had helped arrange the event, but didn't know much about her story. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You played beautifully tonight," he said softly. She turned, startled for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, looking thoughtful. People were moved. You should have seen their faces. You reminded everyone what real music feels like. She looked down, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I didn't play for them," she said gently. "I played for someone I lost. And maybe, a little for myself." He didn't press her for details. He just nodded with understanding. There was a brief silence between them. filled only by the sound of the wind and distant laughter from the theater. Then he said, "If you ever want to perform again, the stage will always be open for you." She smiled, though her eyes looked far away. "Maybe," she replied quietly. They parted ways and she began walking home. Her apartment wasn't far, just a few blocks away. As she walked, she passed by the closed shops and familiar windows glowing softly in the dark. Everything looked the same as always, yet it all felt new. The same world, but lighter somehow, as if the music she played had changed more than just herself. When she reached home, she made tea and sat by the window. The moonlight fell gently on her table. On a small shelf in the corner sat a framed photo, old and faded, showing her and a young man laughing near a piano. She looked at it for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. "I played tonight," she whispered. "I hope you heard me." The clock ticked quietly in the background. She could still feel the rhythm of the piano in her hands, the vibrations in her chest, the sound of the applause, the emotion of the crowd. All of it seemed distant now, like a dream. But what stayed was the peace she felt deep inside. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from her past. She turned off the lights and lay down on her bed, the faint sounds of the town outside lulling her to sleep. Before drifting off, she thought about the people in the audience, strangers who didn't know her story but felt her music. Maybe that's what art truly is, she thought, a bridge between hearts even when words fail. The next morning, sunlight filled her room. She woke up feeling strangely light. As she made her coffee, she noticed something on her doorstep. A small note slipped under the door. It read, "Your music touched many hearts last night. Thank you for sharing it." There was no name at the bottom, just those simple words. She smiled and placed the note on her table. She didn't need to know who wrote it. What mattered was that someone understood. As she got ready for work that morning, she glanced once more at her hands. They no longer felt empty. She decided she would visit her old home soon, the place she had left behind. There was an old piano there covered in dust. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to uncover it again. That night had awakened something inside her, something that wouldn't fade so easily. And even though she didn't know it yet, that one performance had set into motion a chain of events that would reveal long-hidden truths, reconnect broken ties, and change not only her life, but the lives of others who had quietly watched her that evening. The piano had spoken once again, and its echoes were just beginning to reach where they needed to. The next few days after the concert felt quiet but strangely full. The applause had faded. The lights of the stage were long gone, yet something inside her still glowed softly. Every morning as she walked to the bookstore, she carried a calmness she hadn't felt in years. People greeted her the same way they always did, but now their smiles seemed warmer. Some who had attended the concert stopped by the shop just to tell her how much her performance had touched them. She would blush, thank them shyly, and go back to arranging books, but inside her heart, a small spark had begun to grow again. One afternoon, as she was closing the shop, a small girl came in holding a sketchbook. She was no older than 10 and looked a bit nervous. The girl handed her a drawing, a picture of a woman sitting at a piano surrounded by bright lights. "I drew this," the little one said softly, "after seeing you play. My mom said you looked happy when you played, so I wanted to draw that." For a moment she didn't know what to say. She knelt down to the child's level and smiled. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you for drawing this for me." The little girl grinned and skipped away, leaving her standing there holding the drawing carefully in her hands. That small piece of paper meant more to her than words could say. It reminded her that music could reach hearts, even those too young to understand pain. That night she placed the drawing on her table beside the note she had found under her door. 2 small tokens from strangers who had felt her music. She looked at them for a long while before turning to the window. The moon was out again and the same feeling from concert night returned, gentle, bittersweet, and alive. In the days that followed, her evenings became quieter but full of thought. She found herself replaying the concert in her mind, the moment she pressed the first key, the stillness of the hall, the faces she couldn't see but somehow felt. She realized she missed that feeling, the connection, the freedom. For the first time in years, she wanted to play again. Not for anyone else, but for herself. There was a small piano in her apartment building's shared recreation room. It was old and slightly out of tune, but it still worked. One evening, when the building was quiet, She went down with her notebook and sat at the bench. Dust covered the keys and the bench creaked under her, but the sight of it filled her with warmth. She touched the keys gently, pressing one at a time. The sound was a little off, but she smiled anyway. At first, she played simple pieces, short melodies she remembered from her childhood. Her fingers stumbled a few times, but the sound of music filling the room made her heart lighter. Soon, she started playing longer pieces, losing track of time. The piano room became her secret place, a place where she could be herself, away from everything else. One evening, as she was playing softly, she didn't notice someone standing outside the half-open door. It was the same man who had spoken to her after the concert, the event organizer. He had come by to deliver a copy of the event recording for her to keep. But when he heard her playing, he stopped quietly and listened. The melody she played wasn't grand or fast. It was slow, full of emotion, like a conversation between her heart and the piano. When she finished, he gently knocked on the doorframe. She looked up, startled, and then smiled shyly. "I didn't hear you come in," she said. He handed her a small envelope. "This is the recording from the concert," he said. "I thought you might like to have it." She took it carefully and thanked him. They talked for a while, sitting near the piano. He told her how much people had been moved by her performance. Some had written to the community center asking when she would perform again. She listened quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of the piano keys. "I didn't think people would remember it," she said softly. "I just wanted to play once." He smiled. "Sometimes one honest moment stays with people forever," he said. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being the faint hum of the night outside. Then he asked gently, "Have you ever thought about teaching? We've been trying to start a small music program for kids who can't afford lessons. I think they could learn a lot from someone like you." She hesitated. Teaching? She had never imagined doing that. The thought made her both nervous and curious. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't taught before." He shrugged lightly. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to care." That night, after he left, she sat by the piano for a long time thinking about his words. She looked at her hands again, the same hands that once trembled to touch the keys, now steady and full of strength. Maybe this was a way to move forward. Maybe sharing music with others could help her heal even more. A week later, she walked into the community center again, this time not as a performer, but as a volunteer. The room was small, filled with a few old instruments and a group of children laughing and talking loudly. When they saw her, they quieted down, curious. She smiled nervously and introduced herself. "I'm here to help you learn a little about the piano," she said softly. At first, the lessons were chaotic. The children were excited and restless, pressing random keys and giggling. But slowly, they began to listen. She showed them how to sit properly, how to place their fingers gently on the keys. She told them that music wasn't about playing fast or perfect. It was about feeling something real. Over time, she grew to love those lessons. The laughter of the children, their excitement when they learned a simple tune. It brought her joy she hadn't felt in years. It reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. And though she didn't talk much about her past, sometimes when she played for them, her eyes softened, and the children could sense there was a story behind every note. One afternoon, after class, she found one of the older students still sitting at the piano, trying to get a melody right. The boy looked frustrated, his small hands fumbling over the keys. She sat beside him and said, "Close your eyes and listen before you play. Feel what the music wants to say." He tried again, slower this time, and when the melody finally came out right, his face lit up with pride. She smiled. "See? It's not just about fingers. It's about heart." Those words reminded her of something her old teacher had once told her years ago. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice again, encouraging her just like she was now encouraging them. The circle of music had quietly come back around. Months passed and the program grew. More children joined, some shy, some curious, all eager to learn. Her quiet life slowly filled with laughter, sound, and purpose. The townspeople began to notice the change in her too. She smiled more often now, spoke more freely. The bookstore owner even joked that she hummed while working, something she had never done before. But one day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived for her at the bookstore with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old photograph, a picture of her as a young woman sitting at a piano beside her old teacher. The letter simply said, "He's been looking for you. He saw your concert online." Her heart stopped for a moment. Her old teacher? The man who had once guided her, who believed in her talent more than anyone else. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. She sat down, holding the letter tightly, her mind spinning with memories. She didn't know how to feel, an excitement, fear, disbelief. That night she couldn't sleep. She played the concert recording he had given her weeks ago, watching herself on the screen. The trembling hands, the calm face, the music flowing out like a confession. Maybe her teacher had seen this. Maybe that performance had reached him too. As the recording ended, she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time." The next morning, she packed a small bag, took the letter, and boarded a bus out of town. She didn't know exactly what she would say when she met him again, but deep down, she knew this was part of her journey, the next chapter of healing and discovery. The bus rolled past quiet fields and sleepy towns. She looked out the window, the sun casting soft light across her face. She smiled to herself, thinking of how far she had come, from the woman who feared the piano to the one who now taught children how to find their voice through it. The road stretched ahead, full of unknowns, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was ready to face her past, ready to reconnect, and ready to let music continue its quiet work of transforming everything it touched. And as the bus moved forward, she hummed softly under her breath, the same melody she had played that unforgettable night. The song that had changed everything. The bus ride felt longer than it should have, though the distance wasn't that great. As it moved through winding roads and quiet towns, she watched the changing scenery outside her window, the fields, the old houses, and the sun slowly rising above the trees. Every few minutes she found herself touching the letter in her bag, as if to remind herself it was real. Her old music teacher had found her after all these years. It didn't feel possible, but life had already shown her that some things come back when you least expect them. She didn't know what she would say when she saw him. Would he remember her? Would he be disappointed that she had stopped playing all those years? A part of her worried he might think she had wasted her gift. But another part of her, deeper and calmer, told her that this meeting was not about judgment. It was about closure. About understanding. The bus stopped at a small station in a quiet town. She stepped off and took a deep breath. The air smelled of earth and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. The place hadn't changed much. The same narrow streets, the same tall trees near the old park, the same calm stillness. It felt strange to walk here again after so long, like stepping into a dream she once lived. She followed the directions written on the letter and soon arrived at a small music school. The sign outside was old but freshly painted. The sound of a piano came faintly from inside, soft, deliberate notes being practiced by someone young. She stood for a moment listening. That familiar sound filled her chest with a mix of joy and ache. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of wood and sheet music. The walls were covered with photos of students, old posters, and a few certificates. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly open. Through it, she saw him, older now, with silver hair and gentle eyes, sitting at a piano with a small boy beside him. He was teaching the child how to hold his hands correctly on the keys. His voice was calm, steady, full of patience, just as she remembered. For a moment, she simply watched. Memories flooded her. The way he used to tap her wrist gently when she tensed up, the way he would close his eyes and listen carefully as she played. The years seemed to fall away. Then slowly she knocked on the door. He looked up, a bit startled at first. The boy turned too. The teacher's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he didn't move. Then his lips parted and he said quietly, "It's been a long time." She smiled nervously and nodded. "Yes, too long." He dismissed the boy kindly, telling him to practice the scales in the other room. When they were alone, he stood up slowly and walked toward her. The silence between them was heavy but warm. "I saw your performance," he said finally. "The one from the concert. Someone shared it online. I knew it was you the moment I heard the first note." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't think you'd remember." He chuckled softly. "You were one of my brightest students." "How could I forget?" She wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Her throat felt tight. He gestured toward the piano. "Sit," he said gently. "Play something for me." The request made her heart race. It felt like years had melted away, and she was once again the shy student sitting before him waiting for his guidance. She hesitated. "I haven't practiced much lately," she murmured. "That's all right," he said kindly. "Just play what your heart remembers." She sat down, feeling the smooth wood of the bench, the weight of the keys under her fingers. For a few moments she didn't move. Then she began to play, softly, uncertainly at first, but with growing emotion. The melody she chose was one she had played for him long ago, one that had once been her favorite. The room filled with the gentle sound, and for a moment neither of them spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "You still play with feeling," he said. "Even after all this time," she smiled faintly. "It took me years to touch a piano again," she admitted. "After everything that happened," he sighed and sat beside her. "I heard a little about it back then," he said softly. "I was sorry. I didn't know how to reach you." She looked down. "I didn't want to be reached. I thought the music reminded me of too much pain. But now I understand it was never the piano that hurt me. It was what I carried inside." He nodded slowly. "Music can open wounds," he said, "but it can also heal them if you let it." They sat in silence for a while. Then he smiled faintly. "You know, I always believed you would come back to it one day. You had something that couldn't just disappear, a way of making people feel through sound. I saw that again in your concert. That was not just playing, that was a heart speaking." Hearing those words made her eyes fill with tears. "It was the first time I played for someone I lost," she said quietly. "I think that's why it felt so different." He nodded. "Love never really leaves us. It just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes music." His words stayed with her. She looked around the room, at the photos of students, the instruments, the life that had continued here even after she left. For the first time, she didn't feel regret about the years she had missed. Instead, she felt gratitude for having found her way back, no matter how long it took. They talked for hours, about the past, about the years between, about how music had changed. He told her stories of other students who had lost their way and found it again. Before she left, he said, "You should play again, not just for others and for yourself. And maybe when you're ready, help others find their voice too." She promised she would. As she walked out of the school that afternoon, the air felt different, lighter, fresher. The world seemed full of quiet possibilities. On her way back, she stopped by the park she used to visit after lessons when she was younger. The same old benches were still there, though worn from time. She sat down, closing her eyes as the wind brushed against her face. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter echoing through the open space. She smiled to herself, realizing how far she had come. From the girl who had once dreamed of performing everywhere to the woman who now understood that true music didn't need big stages. It only needed truth. When she returned home that evening, she took out the drawing the little girl had given her and placed it next to her piano notebook. Then she opened her window and let the cool night air in. The piano room downstairs was empty, so she went there quietly and began to play again. This time she didn't follow any sheet music. She simply played what she felt. The happiness of seeing her old teacher again, the peace of forgiveness, the memories of her past, and the quiet joy of being alive. The melody flowed freely, raw and pure. A few neighbors passing by the hall stopped and listened through the open window. The sound was calm but deeply emotional, like a story told without words. Some people later said they didn't know who was playing, but it made them stop and think. About love, about loss, about the small moments that make life beautiful. When she finally finished, she sat in silence for a long while, her heart full. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of her past anymore. It was still a part of her, but it no longer hurt. It had become something else, something that gave her strength. Days turned into weeks, and she continued teaching at the community center. The children adored her, not because she was perfect, but because she made them believe they could be more than they thought. She often told them, "Don't just play the notes. Tell your story," and they did. One evening, as she was leaving the center, the organizer approached her again. "We're planning another concert," he said. "This time we want the children to perform, and we'd like you to close the night as our guest performer." She smiled in surprise. "Me again?" He nodded. "You brought this program to life. It's only right that you end it." She didn't answer right away. She looked around at the children laughing, the small piano they practiced on, the warm glow of the hall. Then she said softly, "All right, I'll do it. But this time it's not just my story. It's theirs too." That night she walked home under the stars, feeling content. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was full of purpose. She had come a long way, from silence to sound, from grief to grace. And deep down she knew the next concert would not just be a performance. It would be a celebration of life, of healing, and of the music that had quietly transformed everything. The days leading up to the new concert felt both familiar and different for her. Familiar because the sound of piano music had once again become a daily part of her life. Different because this time it wasn't about proving herself. It was about sharing something real. The small community hall was filled every afternoon with the laughter of children practicing, some playing wrong notes, others getting frustrated, yet all trying their best. She found beauty in their imperfections. Each day she sat beside them, guiding their hands, showing them how to feel the rhythm rather than chase perfection. "It's not about getting every note right," she told them. "It's about meaning every note you play." They listened to her carefully. Some nodded, others just smiled shyly. One little boy who always got nervous before playing asked her one day, "What if I forget during the performance?" She smiled warmly and said, "Then you take a deep breath and play from your heart." People don't remember mistakes. They remember feelings. That sentence stayed with the boy and then with her too. Every evening after practice, when everyone left, she stayed back a little longer, running her fingers over the piano keys, letting quiet melodies fill the empty hall. The moonlight through the window made the wooden floor glow faintly, and she often found herself thinking of how far she had come since that first night she returned to music. There was peace in those moments, a kind she hadn't known in years. One evening, as she was packing up her things, the organizer of the program walked in with a bright smile. "The invitations are ready," he said, holding up a stack of cards. "We're expecting a full house. The children's families, a few local musicians, and even the mayor might come." She laughed lightly. "That's more than I expected. I hope the kids won't get nervous," he grinned. "They have you. They'll be fine." But deep inside she could feel a small tremor of nervousness for herself. It had been months since her last performance, the one that had changed everything for her. That night had been personal, born out of emotion and grief. This one, though, was different. This one was about hope, about letting others feel what she had found again. The following days were filled with rehearsals. The children practiced in small groups, some performing duets, others short solos. She encouraged them to smile, to look up, to enjoy the music rather than fear it. "Remember," she told them, "the audience isn't your judge. They're your listeners. They want to feel something. Give them that." Her words gave them confidence. By the final rehearsal, she could see the excitement shining in their eyes. The night before the concert, she sat alone at her piano at home. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. She opened her notebook and looked at the simple piece she had composed over the past few weeks, a melody inspired by her students, by their laughter, by their mistakes, by their courage. It wasn't complicated or showy. It was honest, warm, and filled with life. She smiled to herself, knowing this was the one she would play to end the concert. The next evening, the hall buzzed with energy. Parents arrived early, helping their children adjust their clothes, fixing ties, brushing hair. The little ones ran around, excited and nervous at the same time. The air was filled with a sense of celebration. Backstage, she could feel her heart racing, not from fear but from anticipation. She peeked through the curtain and saw the audience filling the seats. The lights, the soft murmurs, the smell of polished wood, it all felt both strange and comforting. When the concert began, the children performed beautifully. Some stumbled a little, some played too fast, but the hall filled with applause after every performance. She stood behind the curtain, smiling proudly each time one of them bowed. Then, as the final child finished, the organizer stepped up to the microphone. "Before we end this evening," he said, "we have one last performance by the person who made all this possible. Please welcome her to the stage." The crowd clapped warmly. She took a deep breath and stepped into the light. The applause softened as she sat down at the piano. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She just looked at the keys, then at the audience, faces of people she had taught, helped, and shared moments with. When she finally began to play, The hall fell silent. The melody was gentle, almost like a conversation, the notes flowing like words from the heart. It started slow, soft as a whisper, then grew stronger, filled with the warmth of every story she had lived. The tune carried hints of joy, sorrow, forgiveness, and peace, and all blended together. As she played, she noticed something remarkable. The children were sitting near the front row, their faces glowing with admiration. Some of them even closed their eyes, swaying slightly to the rhythm. Parents held hands, listening quietly. A few people wiped their eyes without even realizing it. For her, it wasn't just a performance. It was a moment of truth, a way to say thank you to life, to music, to all the people who had unknowingly helped her heal. She felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't stop. Her hands moved gracefully, free from fear or tension. Every note seemed to carry a message. You can begin again. You can always begin again. When the final note faded, there was silence for a heartbeat. The kind of silence that comes when people don't want to break the magic too soon. Then slowly the applause began. It grew louder and louder, echoing across the hall. Some people stood clapping with tears in their eyes. She smiled shyly and bowed her head. She didn't expect such a reaction. When she looked up again, she saw her old teacher standing near the back of the hall. He had come quietly without saying a word. Their eyes met across the crowd, and he nodded with a proud smile. That one gesture said more than any words could. After the performance, people gathered around to congratulate her. The children hugged her tightly, their faces glowing with happiness. "You did it," one of them said. "That was the best part." She laughed softly. "No, all of you were the best part. I just finished the story you started." Later that night, when everyone had gone home, she stayed behind to help put the chairs back. The hall was quiet again, except for the faint echoes of laughter that seemed to linger in the air. The organizer came by and handed her a small bouquet of flowers. "That was beautiful," he said. "You didn't just play, you gave people something to feel." She smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." He nodded, then added thoughtfully, "You know, there's something special about you. You don't just teach music. You help people find themselves." His words touched her deeply. When she finally walked home that night, the stars were bright, and the cool breeze brushed softly against her face. She held the flowers close to her chest and thought about how strange life could be, how something broken could become beautiful again, how pain could turn into peace. When she reached home, she placed the flowers beside her piano and sat down one last time. Her fingers rested on the keys, and she whispered quietly to herself, "Thank you." She wasn't sure who she was thanking, maybe life, maybe music, maybe the part of her that had never given up completely. She began to play again, softly, slowly, just for herself. No audience, no stage, no spotlight. Only her, the piano, and the silence that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. As the notes drifted through the room, she closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time, she wasn't playing to be heard. She was playing because she was free. The morning after the concert felt different. The world outside her window looked softer somehow, as if the air itself had changed. The sun came through the curtains in quiet golden stripes, and for the first time in a long while, she woke up without the heaviness she used to feel in her chest. The applause from the night before still echoed faintly in her mind, but it wasn't about pride. It was about peace. She got up, made tea, and sat by the window watching the street below. Children were running to school, people were heading to work, and everything looked so ordinary. Yet to her, it all felt new. She thought about how life had slowly led her back to this moment, how every painful step, every wrong turn, had quietly guided her here. Later that day, she went to the community center again, not as a performer this time, but as a teacher and mentor. The children greeted her with laughter and bright smiles, still full of excitement from the concert. Some were holding flowers their parents had given them. One of the smallest girls ran up to her and said, "I told my mom I want to be like you when I grow up." The words caught her off guard. She knelt down, smiled softly, and said, "You can be whoever you want to be. Just don't forget to follow what makes your heart happy." The little girl nodded with a grin and ran off to join her friends. Watching them, she realized how music had done something far greater than she expected. It hadn't just healed her. It had become a bridge between her and others. It connected her to people in ways words couldn't. Over the next few months, the piano classes grew. More children joined. Some adults started coming too. people who had always wanted to learn but never had the chance. The hall that once felt empty during the evenings was now filled with sound, laughter, and sometimes even off-key notes that made everyone smile. She began to feel that this was where she truly belonged. One afternoon, as she was locking up after class, she noticed a young man standing outside, holding a small notebook. He looked nervous but hopeful. "Are you the piano teacher?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, do you want to learn?" He smiled shyly. "Actually, I used to play a little when I was younger. Then life got busy, but after hearing your concert last month, I wanted to try again." His words warmed her heart. She invited him in and told him to play something, anything. His fingers were stiff at first, hesitant, but she could tell he still had a spark. She smiled and said, "It's still there. You just need to trust your hands again." That night, as she walked home, she realized how many people had stories like hers. People who had once loved something deeply and then lost touch with it. Maybe, she thought, this was her purpose now, to help them find their way back. Weeks passed. The town's small music community began to grow around her. The local newspaper even wrote an article about the classes and how the once quiet hall had turned into a place of inspiration. People began calling it the heart of music. She never sought fame or recognition, but she couldn't help smiling when she read the article. It wasn't just about her. It was about all the people who had walked through that door and rediscovered something inside themselves. Sometimes, when she was alone at night, she still thought about the first time she played again after years of silence. The memory of that performance, the letter from her old teacher, the faces of the children, they all came back to her like scenes from a dream. And each time she remembered, she whispered a quiet thank you to the music that had never truly left her, even when she had walked away from it. One quiet evening, as the sun was setting, her old teacher came to visit her at the center. His hair was even grayer now, and he walked a little slower, but his eyes still carried the same calm strength she remembered. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. Looking around the hall filled with instruments and laughter from the other room, she smiled. "I didn't plan any of this. It just happened," he chuckled. "The best things often do. You've done what every teacher hopes their student will do. You found your own way." They sat down at the piano together side by side, just like old times. He played a few chords and she followed. Their notes blended effortlessly, creating a sound both nostalgic and alive. When they finished, he looked at her and said softly, "You've become the teacher now." The words made her eyes sting with tears. She laughed quietly and said, "I learned from the best." After he left, she sat at the piano for a while longer, thinking about how everything had come full circle. The student had become the teacher, the pain had turned into peace, and the silence had become music again. Months later, the center organized another event, not a big concert, but a small evening of music and stories. The children played their pieces, the adults shared what music meant to them, and she ended the night with a simple melody she had written recently. It was called A Night of Secrets and Emotions. The piece wasn't about sadness or loss. It was about how life holds both, the quiet moments of pain and the bright bursts of joy, and how they coexist like notes in a song. The audience listened quietly, and when she finished, the room felt wrapped in a gentle stillness. After the performance, someone asked her, "What inspired this melody?" She smiled thoughtfully and said, "Everything that once hurt me, and everything that healed me." That night, as she walked home through the cool evening air, the town lights twinkled like stars scattered on the ground. She passed the old park, the same one she used to sit in after lessons years ago. She stopped there for a while, sitting on a bench under the trees. The wind rustled softly through the leaves, carrying a faint sound of laughter from somewhere far away. She closed her eyes and thought of the little girl she once was, the one who had dreamed of playing for the world, who had later lost her way and who now had finally found peace in simple things. If she could speak to that girl now, she would tell her, "Don't worry about how long it takes. The music will find you again when it's time." A few months later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a student who had moved away. The letter said, "You taught me more than piano. You taught me that even if life stops the music for a while, it never takes it away completely." She read it twice and smiled. That single line felt like a gift, proof that what she was doing mattered. Years passed quietly, and her life settled into a rhythm she loved. The sound of piano keys, the laughter of students, the quiet evenings of reflection, they all became part of her world. Sometimes she performed, sometimes she didn't. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the joy in each day, the small ways she could help others rediscover their spark. On her last day at the center before taking a long-awaited rest, the children surprised her with something. They had painted a sign above the piano that said, "Music lives here." When she saw it, she couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged them all and said, "Promise me one thing, never stop playing even if life gets hard. Because when you play, you remind the world that beauty still exists." That night she walked home for the last time under the same old streetlights. Her steps were slow but peaceful. She had lived a life full of ups and downs, but every part of it had led her here, to a place where her heart finally rested. At home, she sat by her piano one more time. The keys were slightly worn from years of use, each one holding a story. She placed her hands gently on them, not to perform, but to say goodbye. The tune she played was soft and calm, almost like a lullaby, a farewell to the journey that had once started with a single note. As she finished, she looked out the window at the quiet town below. The night was still, the stars clear and bright. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Music never really ends. It just keeps finding new hearts to live in." And somewhere in that silence it felt like the piano answered her, not with words, but with the quiet echo of everything she had ever played, loved, and felt.